The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. And when the wine ran short, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it. And when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine, without knowing where it came from, although the servers who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first. Then, when people have drunk freely, an inferior one. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The psalm response says it all. The Lord takes delight in his people. The Lord takes delight in his people. The Lord takes delight in us. The Lord takes delight in you. You, plural, and you, singular. The Lord takes delight in you. I don't want to say that too often, or I might begin to sound not so delightful. But the fact of the matter is, how often do we realize that the foundation, the basis, the starting point for everything that the Lord calls us to is to realize that the Lord takes delight in you, in me. We often think of the Lord's will. The Lord wants good for us. The Lord wants us to try harder and get to heaven and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the first word. The first word from God is, "I take delight in you." And so what are we called to? We're called to respond to that delight that God takes in us. In the first reading, there were some, the author of the letter to John was talking about deadly sins, and some of them can't be forgiven, and blah, blah, blah. But the main thing that he says is that the one begotten by God is protected. The one in whom God takes delight, you and me, is protected. The evil one cannot touch us if we recognize the delight that God takes in us. The evil one cannot touch us. And then in John's Gospel, the way that Jesus begins by signifying who he is, gives us a sign of who he is, gives us a sign that speaks so clearly of God's delight. There's nothing more delightful and filled with hope than a wedding. And so he starts with a wedding. Now there's a little bit of a dark side there, because I like to think implied in this text was Mary was a friend of this couple, these families, and was invited to the wedding. And, oh yeah, Jesus is around, well, we'd better invite him too. And, oh yeah, he's got all of these disciples, well, we've got to invite them too. And they drank up all the wine. Maybe it wasn't poor planning on the part of the groom. Maybe it was just all of these disciples of Jesus drank up the wine. I don't know. It's kind of fun to think that way anyway. But the point is, the lack, the emptiness, the running out of wine was fulfilled in superabundance. You know, something like 6 times 20 is 120 gallons of wine was given to them. Enough for all the guests to drink freely, and quite enough for the couple to have a very nice honeymoon. But the point is that it's out of the kind of the despair of suddenly we run out of wine that God gives a superabundance. Now, my last point is one of the gifts that God gives in superabundance is all of these wonderful people throughout history who actually do have something to say to us about how wonderful God is. St. Raymond of Penyafort, whom most of us, if we have heard of him, we sort of relegate him to somewhere over there. He's not very meaningful to us. But you know, he lived about halfway between the time of Jesus and us. He was Spanish, Catalan to be exact, and he was very much of an intellectual. And he was commissioned in his career to be a canon lawyer. And everybody knows canon law is not something you want to mess with. But canon law really does provide a service, and that is it gives a framework within which we can be free. And there was a problem with canon law about that time, because laws really are made when there are decrees. A king or a ruler makes, or a pope or a bishop makes a decree that things need to be this way for good order. And then those decrees are sort of filed somewhere. And what the Pope asked Raymond to do was go and research all of these decrees and put them together so that we've got some kind of a collection of decrees and laws that we can refer to. So they're not just scattered all over the place. And so he did that. That was one of his major life's work. And when he finished, he retired. He retired at about the age that a lot of people who are fortunate retire, somewhere in his 60s. And he looked forward to probably a life, the rest of his life, of prayer and holiness and peace. Not so, because he was called out of retirement to be the head of the Dominican order. And he took that very conscientiously. Finally, he was able to retire from that, and he took the job of preaching and going from place to place all throughout Spain and a few other parts of Europe, preaching and teaching, trying to give people a better understanding of what their faith means. And he was tireless in doing that. Now here's where he is especially the patron and the gift to you and me. He died at age 99. So when he retired, in some ways his most productive years were ahead of him. But they weren't what he planned. And maybe the real gift to us, who have been given the gift of not dying when a lot of people that we know and who are very good people have already died, but we're still here, maybe the gift that he gives to us is your life still has meaning. God still takes delight in you. And God still has a purpose for you. Even if you're not capable of doing much else except to pray. Simply pray. Commend all of the people who are in need. And the people that we don't like, whether it's in our own private lives or whether it's in the public life, the people we don't like are the ones who are most in need of our prayers. Not to tell God how to straighten them out, but to simply commend them to the Lord and say, Lord, touch them in your mercy. Heal them of whatever afflictions that they have. Forgive whatever blocks them from being pleasing to you. Commend them to the Lord.